I don't know if either of you had a chance to listen to the Michael Hayes episode that dropped this past week, but he tells this story about Michael Hayes doing a urine waterfall over the over the restroom barricade onto Jeff Hardy's face, and like all of a sudden that opens up a whole conversation about different ribs that Michael Hayes, and like you don't want to take away from that in the conversation, right? So you have to be fluid and listening. That's my biggest piece of advice to anyone who conducts interviews. Listen to the responses, because that gives you a new pathway to something else ultimately.
All right, Trendsetter, very, very happy to do this interview. Long time coming, and I really want to thank him, actually our next guest, for giving us the time. He is Jon Alba. He is the co-host for Extreme Life of Matt Hardy. It's available Fridays on all podcast platforms. He is the one and only Jon Alba on the Podcast Heat Network too, by the way. Jon, what's going on, man? How are you doing?
Oh, just crazy busy these days, but being busy is a good thing. We got the Hardy Show. We announced the Wives of Wrestling podcast that's dropping on Mondays. It's been wild, but it's been a lot of fun at the same time. I appreciate you guys having me.
No, man, and it's the that podcast drops on the February 7th, right? So that's another one that's added to your very busy schedule. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. But hey, listen, man, we were talking about getting this interview done, and obviously we're guys in the Northeast here in Jersey. We're bracing this weather, man, and you're coming actually back to the Northeast from being there in sunny Florida, man. What are you thinking, dude? Is it because it's closer? You're closer to New York, the mecca of media, or is it, you just crazy and you just a glutton for punishment coming back to the Northeast?
That's what everyone's always like. You're leaving Florida voluntarily for Jersey? Well, I mean, I grew up in Jersey. Jersey, you can take the kid out of Jersey, but the Jersey's never going to leave you. So I've lived all around. I've lived in Maine, Connecticut, Florida, and now for the first time in my career, I have a gig that allows me to broadcast remotely. So having that flexibility, it allows me to be back near my family for the first time in 10 plus years. So as family gets older and my sister's getting married this year, like you want to be around for those life events, and I feel like kind of personally with who I am, the Northeast and the tri-state area is just, that's my vibe, that's my pace. Everything in the South is so much slower, and like, that's cool, but it's not my pace at all. So it's just one of those things that it was bittersweet because I really did love Orlando, but this is where I belong right now. I got the picture of the 98 Yankees behind me, the 99 Yankees above that, like that's my life. So
see, Jon, you and I can understand that Jeff's a Met fan, so he has no idea what you're talking about.
The tide is turning. The tide is turning.
Mets, when you have an owner who's committed to actually winning, it's pretty crazy how things change, isn't it?
Yeah, but they're still the Mets still, so you can't take that away from the.
They'll be great until like May 11th, and
there
then
you go.
everything.
Once we get back from the strike, we'll have a couple of weeks to anticipation. Scherzer, Lindor, and then we'll get back to reality because they're the Mets. But one thing too is not only are you a wrestling fan and really well knowledge in wrestling, but you're also, your background is in sports, Emmy Award winner too. So in sports broadcasting, so that's kudos to you. So we can talk about sports too.
Talk about whatever you want
down the road, but right now it's about that podcast with Matt Hardy.
Because he has the baseball in his hand.
Exactly.
Kind of showcase his knowledge.
Look at this. This is unique. This is the Orlando Dreamers. Okay. And for those who don't know, the Orlando Dreamers, Pat Williams, the guy who founded the Orlando Magic, back in 2019, he decided he was going to launch an effort to land an expansion baseball team in Orlando. A terrible idea, never going to work. But like if they could get the Rays to relocate, maybe that's an idea. Yeah. But I covered the event and I had this, and now it's my stress ball. So I apologize. That's a little sidebar there.
He's gonna get me into asking sports questions.
No, well deserved though. A lot of stress, a lot of stuff that you're doing, and something I wanted to ask in terms of the podcast you're doing with Matt Hardy. I need to ask this too. You said you were a fan growing up, and now you're doing it with him. I know it must be a surreal moment, but you had mentioned before in previous interviews that loving that behind the scenes, understand the psychology of it. From a fan standpoint, I've learned to garner a greater appreciation for it now that I kind of see the behind the scenes type of thing. Do you think that really the curtain should be fully pulled off and people shouldn't really worry so much about the fact that we know how it happens as opposed to just understanding the pureness of how it's all created?
Pro wrestling is built on a magic trick, right? And some people like to not know the magic. Some people really like to. I mean, I can remember when I pitched the podcast to Matt, the first statement out of his mouth was kayfabe is dead. And the sooner that we accept that, the sooner everyone's able to move forward. That's not how everybody feels about wrestling. There are a lot of people who want to protect that craft. I think there's a happy medium that can be had. For me personally, I kind of view pro wrestling through the prism of how like a sports analyst would, where I really enjoy breaking down the nuances of it. But I know some people like not having that wall broken down, right? Like people really do enjoy the surprise, or they enjoy not knowing how the sausage is made. And I respect that entirely. So I think it's entirely circumstantial based on where people come from. But I do think it also requires you to at least acknowledge that we are at a point in our timeline of pro wrestling that it is okay to acknowledge publicly that it is a magic trick, and that if some people want to be in on that magic trick, I don't think we should withhold that from them.
Yeah, no doubt about that, John. And what I want to ask you is that when you were talking with Matt at Chipotle about this podcast,
Great place, by the way.
yes,
Yeah, he got a free meal because the kid behind the counter saw him, like he were putting the order in, and the kid behind the counter was like, I'll get it for you. Like it's on me, it's on me. And Matt's like, no, you're a good man. He's like, no, you're like a hero of mine. And like that was the coolest thing for me, because I'm like seeing like this guy that I'm about to pitch the show with, like he meant so much to this kid behind the counter, right? 17, 18 years old. I just thought that was the coolest thing. Sorry, another sidebar. Go ahead,
No.
finish the question. I apologize.
Once you do something in the wrestling business, the fans are 100% loyal. Fans are the best, man.
Very.
I mean, we've been,
in my opinion, the most loyal fans in the world.
We've gone to StarCast. We've gone to all these events. Good Lord, you do something in the business positive, people are going to love you forever, dude. Just that's one example there of a fan at a Chipotle giving Matt Hardy a free meal because, hey, he meant that much to him in his childhood, right? And that's a great story. But when you're talking about the podcast and you're talking about how you want to go about it, how important was it for you to use the idea that Matt's a current wrestler who has that perspective, not only of talking about the nostalgia and not only talking about the inner workings, but having a current wrestler on a active roster in a major company? How key was that for you to push too? Because you guys can offer a different amount of variety in your show.
That was the selling point for me. That was the no-brainer, right? Like there are so many nostalgia pro wrestling podcasts right now that even my own boss cultivated, you know, and he kind of laid the groundwork for all that stuff. But having the ability to take the past and talk about how it affected the present, or to straight up talking about events that are going on in real time, I think that's the secret sauce of our podcast. And when we did episode 2 on Hangman Page, I thought that the insight on the AEW creative process that we got out of that was incredible. Hearing how Tony Khan goes about protecting baby faces and building a baby face during the pandemic, I just thought it was so fascinating. And, you know, it's funny because the more positive feedback we've gotten so far with the podcast have been in the nostalgia episodes. And I thought immediately, I'm like, people are going to latch onto this like current stuff, but I think it's taking a little more time on that. And I think it will happen over time, but I think it's almost like one of those things. It's like, oh, wow, they're willing to talk about the present. So that was a huge selling point for me with Matt. And when I met with him, I'm like, what is off limits? And there was very, very few things that were off limits. And he was more than open to talk about what's going on in the current product, which I said, man, there's nobody else doing that right now in these major companies. So I think that was a huge selling point.
No, that's definitely great from a creative standpoint, and obviously you going pitching this idea that you had in your head of what you wanted to do. But my question to you is generally like for what Jeff and I do here, and then other things that I try to be creative. There's one thing where like you can just jot down, all right, we're going to be talking about all these things, but not really scheduling them per se, but having an idea of what the focus is going to be from week to week or month to month. But my question to you is when you're talking to Matt and you're doing these episodes that you've done, and a great one, I love the Adam Hangman Page one. It was is it more of just open forum? Hey Matt, just say what you want to say. Are you giving direction in terms of, hey, let's focus a little bit on that? Are you kind of reeling in sometimes? Are you kind of judging where you wanted to go, or is it more of just Matt kind of going off and speaking his mind of the topic that you guys are talking about?
Yeah, I love talking about like this is how the sausage is made, right? Like this is the nuance. So I appreciate these questions. So what a lot of people may not realize is that I produce these podcasts too. And by that, I mean, I'm doing all the research for them myself. So I will spend the entire week researching on this particular topic. I'll use that Hangman Page episode as an example. I went and watched every single Hangman Page Matt Hardy segment that happened in their AEW feud. I went back and watched their Ring of Honor match. I went back and watched their pay-per-view match. And then I went through Cage Match and wrote down every single time that they've been in the ring together. I found interviews from the past where either guy talked about each other. And with that, this is kind of using my producing experience that I've had in TV. I build a rundown. I build a format. Okay, this is the general way that this is going to go. But those are, ways that Matt can refresh his memory a little bit. But what I end up doing is my interview style is I don't pre-prepare questions. I may have an idea of what I want to talk about in an interview, but everything is a follow-up. So I then use follow-ups to help steer the conversation along that loose rundown. And that's how we get from point A to point B ultimately. And if Matt has a good interjection that he wants to add, power to him, because that might take us in another direction. So it's pretty fluid when we're taping it.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be gold sometimes where you're talking about something and he's just going at it and you didn't think he was going to say that. And you're like, oh, we got to keep this going,
Yeah, I mean, that just happened on the Michael Hayes. I don't know if either of you had a chance to listen to the Michael Hayes episode that dropped this past week, but he tells this story about Michael Hayes doing a urine waterfall over the over the restroom barricade onto Jeff Hardy's face, and like all of a sudden that opens up a whole conversation about different ribs that Michael Hayes, and like you don't want to take away from that in the conversation, right? So you have to be fluid and listening. That's my biggest piece of advice to anyone who conducts interviews. Listen to the responses, because that gives you a new pathway to something else ultimately.
And so obviously Conrad Thompson, who we call him, everyone calls him now the Podcast King, right? How big of influence has he been for you as far as now, of course, you're working for ad-free shows. I think early October you started. And so how big of influence was he even before you even came on a board? Like what kind of influence is Conrad for you today now as you become an interviewer in the podcast print maybe? Like that, right?
Yeah. Hey, boy. I appreciate that. I discovered something to wrestle very early in its run, like maybe like episode 4 or so. And I just kind of got to know Conrad through the years through that. They had their first live event, a WrestleMania 33 weekend, and I went and covered it and did a news piece on them. And it was really fascinating. And he and I kind of cultivated a relationship after that. And over the years, we'd talk and make stuff happen there. And then one day, last year, it was right after WrestleMania in Tampa, he called me and he was like, I got an idea about you coming on and doing some content for me. And I was like, oh yeah, that'd be cool. But I got my news contracts and all this. I got to figure out what I'm going to do. And we hung up. I was like, wait a minute. I think he was talking about bringing me on full time, like to do this. I didn't even realize it. So I called him back. I'm like, were you talking about like doing things full time here? And he's like, yeah. I was like, huh. So this is an alternative path that I can pursue where I'm using my skill set as a broadcaster and talking exclusively about something that I'm very passionate about. And the thing that I always felt I was really good at, but didn't get to do as much in TV news because you're on such time constraints, is long form interviewing. So having this platform to do that on ad-free shows and podcast heat, it's perfect for me. And it's really, I feel, plays into my strengths as a broadcast personality. And I've been listening to Conrad for 6 years now, 7 years, and I think his style of interviewing is really, really conversational, and it's entertaining. So I take influences from that, but I also try to bring my own background as a professional broadcaster and maybe tighten things up a little bit and present it in my own way that I feel is maybe a little more professional per se, but still very effective at the same rate. And I take a lot of influence from him, and I talk frequently, and I'm always open to feedback that he has. But to his credit, he gives me a lot of creative freedom to stretch my legs and do things the way that I want to. So I'm very appreciative of that.
That is awesome, man. And I don't know if you could answer this because we had him on a while ago. And when does he sleep, man? Like, when the heck does this man sleep? But listen, man, we love everything he does, man. And you're on board now on ad-free shows. We're talking about Extreme Life of Matt Hardy with Jon Alba. We'll talk about the upcoming podcast on Monday, February 7th with Jon in a bit, Wives of Wrestling. So definitely look out for that one. But I want to get back to, because I like the inner workings. I'm a mark for the Montreal screw job. I can't get enough. I need to know everything, right? So the episode that fascinates me the most is the Hangman Page one, because not everyone's talked about that time where the Bucks, Page, Omega, Cody were free agents. And we had that All In, which changed everything, right? You mentioned how one tweet changed it all by Meltzer, right?
Mm-hmm.
But just the fact that now with things going on with Triple H the way they are, and how everyone has their own conspiracy theory of what happened to Triple H. We had the medical procedure. Not like a WWE medical procedure, right? I'm saying medical procedure. He had the heart issue. And now NXT, his baby, has been taken away from him. There's no sight when he's ever going to get it back, if he's ever going to get it back. And you talked about how he pushed for them to get signed, threw a ton of money at them. How crazy would it be if Triple H would have managed to get to them? And what the success would have been had they taken Triple H away from NXT? Like, it would have been totally different. You might see the Bucks, Kenny, and all of them be deep pushed because they were Triple H's guys.
I mean, AEW wouldn't exist straight up in that case. AEW wouldn't exist. NXT never changes from what it is. If anything, it probably picks up more momentum. And it's a totally different pro wrestling timeline in the multiverse that just, it's a radically different industry at that point. There's nothing similar to what it resembles right now. So them not being able to bring them in, it's quite literally just a completely different path. So it is crazy. And that's why I wanted to ask Matt about it, because I was curious about Matt's perspective as someone who was in WWE at the time. And knowing the Bucks, we're going to do an episode on the Young Bucks specifically later this year. And Matt is super close with the Young Bucks, and there's a lot of similarities between the path of the Young Bucks and the path of the Hardy Boyz. So I wanted to hear some of his insight on that. And I thought he gave some really interesting insight talking about that.
No, he definitely did. And the exciting thing, you just hit the nail right in the head. I mean, if that happens, then AEW All In, nothing of this ever happens. I mean, we're not talking about what we're currently talking about right now. No. You might not be doing a podcast with Matt right now.
I wouldn't be doing a podcast with Matt Hardy.
Exactly. Nope. So a lot of things had changed, and what a crazy time in terms of all those things, which I think you'll never see again ever at least in our lifetime, where everyone was free agent at the same time and something like this occurred and happened. But going back a little bit real quick in terms of, talking about the landscape of wrestling and Jeff mentioning, what's going on with the WWE, what I seem to find enjoyable about AEW, maybe, I'm not jumping on the bandwagon here, but it seems to be an alternative or another source of seeing something different if you're not into the WWE product. But I also feel as if that with AEW and places like Impact, for example, and Ring of Honor at the time when they were promoting, now they're in a hiatus right now in New Japan, they're really promoting and introducing newer stars, maybe people that we weren't really familiar with, which was something interesting. WWE seems to fail at doing that from, trying to be as objective as possible. I'm not trying to bash the product, but it just really seems like
careful, you'll show up on Reddit by tomorrow morning.
Oh my goodness, I gotta be careful, right? But it just really seems they have a difficult time of in terms of not just creatively storyline wise, but producing and bringing up the younger talent. Because right now, as Jeff talked about, NXT were a lot of Triple H's guys, indie wrestlers who had been on the scene for quite a while. There have been now, this new NXT 2.0 version seems to be like the new mantra, the new model of what a superstar is supposed to be. What do you think, if any, is the one thing that's WWE failing right now to focus on and creating newer stars like what AEW does right now?
I actually did a Twitter thread on this the other day right after the Royal Rumble, and I think the Royal Rumble was kind of a microcosm of what this issue is, and it's that for so many years, and it was really highlighted in that match, that talent are only allowed to get past a certain level, and only a select few are allowed to be big-time superstars and given that opportunity to be big-time superstars. And when someone doesn't have the credibility to potentially win a big match like the Royal Rumble, nobody's going to take them seriously as someone who can contend for a championship. And if you can't take a talent seriously as someone who can contend for a championship, then they're never going to get to that level that people look at them as a big-time superstar. So it's a reflection of inconsistency in booking, inconsistency in storytelling and character development. And as a result, guys never just get to that next level. So I think that's what the core issue is. And, when you look at a guy, and I really don't like doing comparisons of AEW to WWE because then the tribalism comes out. But like, if you look at a guy like Jon Moxley, for example, Jon Moxley has a nice long run with the AEW World Championship. From this point on, Jon Moxley will be viewed as perpetual contender in AEW no matter where he is. Same thing for Hangman Page once his run with his championship ends. He was given time. Whereas with Big E, for example, he was given this championship run suddenly and then immediately deregulated back to where he was with no fluidity at all. Instead, he goes right back to SmackDown as a tag team act. It happened with Kofi Kingston, right? So I just think that that's kind of the big reflection right there, that talent just are never going to be able to reach past that certain level unless something changes in that creative process.
You're right. It's about the structure, right? Because I remember you mentioned it, Jon Moxley too, him on Talk is Jericho, really opening up similar to what you had with Adam Hangman Page episode, where like you learned about the inner workings of AEW and how creative is kind of done. When Jon Moxley was on Talk is Jericho, you heard all these things that Jon Moxley was talking about, and you're like, wow, those are really the inner workings of the W machine. And man, I was getting frustrated for Jon Moxley when he would try to pitch an idea and then it just wouldn't go and they would throw something back at him. So it must be really a frustrating environment there from just my perspective of it. But my goodness, it's like you look at the roster and all the cuts they did, right? And then I look at the roster of all the cuts they did from year to year and look at the roster size they have right now. I kind of find it hard to believe, just from a fan or just being objective, that you couldn't find another star with all those talents signed. It really felt like they were just kind of signing people for the sake of signing them and really not expecting to do anything with them.
Yeah. And you look at a guy like Keith Lee, for example, right? Like a layup in terms of how is this guy a miss? Or Adam Cole, how is this guy a miss? And it's reflective of the process and the culture. And again, that's not me trying to crap on something. It's just, I mean, there are people who can't talk about it, but I think it's pretty evident, right, from the outside looking in at the end of the day. And I think when you listen to our show, Matt's very honest talking about that, talking about that stuff. And it's a really interesting perspective of that process.
Is that the main thing that you got out of the Royal Rumble? A lot of people were not fans of the show, but is that the main?
Yeah, to me, it was just like you knew Brock Lesnar was winning that Royal Rumble, and like it's okay if creative is telegraphed and like you think, okay, Brock's probably going to win this thing, but at no point, at least for me, I could be wrong, maybe there's other people who disagree, but at no point did I think any other person in that match was going to win. It was just Brock Lesnar.
Yeah,
and especially once AJ Styles was probably the only other person I was like, okay, maybe there's a chance here if they want to heat him up or something, but once AJ was out, thrown out by Madcap Moss, like there's, I did not believe anybody else stood a chance at winning. And maybe that's just me. I could be wrong in that, but based on the response I got on social media, I don't think I was. And it's a credibility thing.
So here's the thing, right? And again, John, man, thank you for your time here. Social media is the positive and the negative, because when they talk about building stars, right, there's a rumor. Again, these are just rumors. You don't, like, a Matt Riddle would have probably won had it not been for Brock Lesnar, had they not, had it not been part of the storyline where Brock challenges Roman, right? Where it would have been Riddle. And you get people that are like, Matt Riddle, and, but there's the catch there, because had Matt Riddle won, you'd be people that'd be like, oh, Matt Riddle, I mean, he's not, it's like they want new stars, yet they don't have that patience for WWE to create the star. They want to already be like on to the next one. That's my only issue about WWE, because while I think sometimes they rely on those part-timers, right? I do think that sometimes when they do try to push, like, here it is with Roman Reigns, it was, I guess, you can't shove him down our throats, but now when he's a heel and he's this cool ass heel, now we'll accept him. But we want Roman Reigns 3 years ago, we're like, get him out of here. How could he beat The Undertaker? That's, to me, the only issue I have with fans that get on WWE for trying to make stars. Well, when they try to, you just guys lash out on social media.
The problem is with WWE making stars is that it's so start-stop. Big E is the perfect example of this, right? Like, Big E gets the championship, and then is he booked in a way that accentuates his positives from there? No, not at all. Same thing with Bianca Belair. The positives were not accentuated to the point where they're taken believably as a champion. Drew McIntyre was an anomaly, because Drew McIntyre did get the Hulk Hogan booking for a while, and I'm curious how that would have gotten over with crowds. We'll never know, but I just think that when talent are not presented as tippy top stars when they're champions or credible, or they don't have enough of a long reign to build enough momentum where people view them on a different level than the people below them, it's not going to work. So, for example, let's say Riddle were to win the WWE Championship. Okay, well, if he's presented in a goofy manner, or if he's given a short reign, or if he's not presented in a way that is above some of the already established top stars, it's not going to get him over to the point where he then becomes a top star going forward. So that's just kind of the way I look at it. Like, Big E was champion, but Seth Rollins was positioned as a bigger star than him when Big E was champion, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the issue at hand here.
Yeah, I always worry about where WWE goes after WrestleMania, because when you're the new champion, it's a scary time that heading into the summer, those few months in between, it's either make or break for that person.
Yeah, and like, if I'm going to put on my fantasy booking hat here for a second,
boy,
and I know, but like,
we all love the fantasy book.
Man. Let's say hypothetically that the plan is to put the title on Riddle at some point, right? So let's say he's in the Elimination Chamber, right? Let's say he wins the title there. And then let's say they turn Randy and Riddle's your WrestleMania match, where Riddle is going into WrestleMania as the champion. And in theory, like, overcoming your jealous tag team partner, it's a good little story to tell. Yeah. So how will he be presented after he wins? Will he be goobing out to Randy every week up until WrestleMania? Yeah. Will he definitively beat Randy at WrestleMania? Like, will it be a DQ finish at WrestleMania? Like, so like, there's so many little variables that if you mess up on one, it could lead to a train of things going forward. So just an example.
Yeah, completely right. I mean, we all love to put our fantasy hats and play Monday quarterback and kind of figure things out, being hindsight 2020. But I need to ask you this, because I've been throwing this idea to Jeff. I've been throwing this idea to a lot of people that we've had on the show. They're in the industry, not necessarily AEW, but Impact and the various indie promotions here in the metropolitan area. And they've all kind of given me an interesting idea on this. Listen, sometimes there can be a lot of saturation with what we're currently having right now. We're living in an amazing era right now where we're talking, all three of us here are talking about wrestling. How cool is that, right? Cool concept to think about. But with things like that, with the build up to WrestleMania, and when WrestleMania ends, the night after WrestleMania Raw, is exciting time. But then, from my point of view, it kind of dwindles down there. I told Jeff, how cool would it be, though, if they had seasons within wrestling? And I know it might not make much sense, but let's say WrestleMania is your season finale. And so when they come out with like the Raw debut, we're like, what season is this? There's never a break in between. I know wrestling is known for never having an off season, right? But how cool would it be in terms of revigorating the audience, saying, listen, WrestleMania is the cutoff point, then it's the night after WrestleMania, and then, hey, we'll see you in 3 weeks for another re-debut as we start up the storylines. Is that an interesting concept you think that not AEW, WWE would do, but a promotion would do to a successful standpoint?
I mean, I openly talked about that at the beginning of the pandemic. I was like, there is no better time than now for people to just shut things down, take a break, and come back refreshed. And I understand why like a company like AEW couldn't afford to do that. I understand that because they were still in the proving ground stage and TV contracts and all that stuff. But like, especially in WWE's case, like WWE has so much archived material and stuff that they could go out there, put together promo packages, build up your TV stars for the next month to 2 months, and come back recharged and refreshed and all that. I think it's something that would benefit a lot of companies in terms of a creativity standpoint. Is it in the current business model financially viable? I don't think it is, but it's always something that I think would be very fascinating to see from a creative standpoint for sure.
Yeah, I think the fans and the talent would enjoy that very well because
I don't think they'd complain about having a few weeks off. That definitely wouldn't be a bad thing.
We talked a lot here with Jon Alba, and we're gonna let him get unpack his winter coats in just a few
I got all the time in the world for you guys. We can go as long as you want.
Oh man, don't tempt me, John. Don't tempt me before Conrad calls you for something.
We got some Jersey guys here. It's all good with me.
Listen, man, we gotta look out for each other, dude. Wives of Wrestling. You were talking about Randy Orton before you guys were talking about it, and I was like, see, I listened, and that would have been a great segue for me to get into that. Talk about this podcast. I mean, you've got Randy Orton's wife, Kim Orton, and you've got Kurt Angle's wife, Giovanna Angle. Listen, man, you had Housewives of Jersey. You have Housewives of everything. It's about freaking time someone came up with this idea. Brilliant, man. Brilliant. Getting a perspective from the female, right? Awesome in the wrestling business, the wife of a wrestler. How long of a time coming was this to bring about, and how did it come about?
My first day on the job was October 4th, I think. On October 5th, we had this idea pitched. It was one of those things where my team came to me and was like, hey, these two people are interested in doing a podcast. How can we do it? And then I said, okay, let me think about this. And lo and behold, the Wives of Wrestling podcast was born. And the format is completely my kind of vision for it, and it will be subject to change based on how things go. But it was basically like, here's Giovanna, Kim Orton, you've never met them, go come up with a show concept and deliver it. So we've been developing this since the beginning of October, and I've been cultivating that relationship with Giovanna and Kim, because the thing is, like, this is a lifestyle show. It's based in the world of pro wrestling, but very seldom will pro wrestling actually be talked about on the show. It's life lessons about raising a family. What do you do when your husband is gone on the road for 300 days a year? Let's hear some behind the scenes secrets about Kurt or Randy or some other husbands, perhaps, on like how they are with their families and like the softer side of them. Episode 2 we taped is about like dealing with the struggles of celebrity life, because they were normal women that were thrust into celebrity life. And like, when is it appropriate, if you see a celebrity out to dinner with their family, is it appropriate to go up to them and talk to them?
No, I'll answer that question.
But but you see, they both said, yes, it is. So like and it's really interesting perspective. I mean, I'm giving you guys some details here that are not even public yet, but like, every episode starts with an opening toast and a shot. And we have a swear jar where there's color-coded beads, and whoever has the most swears at the end of each episode has to do a farewell toast. So it's very much like a happy hour vibe that we're going for. It's based in the world of wrestling, but it's so totally different than any other wrestling podcast that's ever existed. And you will find that G and Kim are so endearing, and they are strong, sassy Latina and Italian ladies, and they are not afraid to drop an F-bomb if they need to, but they are very, very, very very loving and caring individuals who will do anything for their families. And I think it's going to be a really cool listen for people.
Oh, they sold me on the trailer, John. That was
You like the trailer?
Yeah, I was listening to
God
you
bless 'em for that.
all professional and smooth. Then you get the pause and you get them, and you can tell the Italian and Latina.
Oh yeah, Kim Orden has the thickest Queen's accent I have ever heard in my life. I'm the wife of the Viper, Mr. Randy Orton, Mr. RKO himself, the apex predator, and she's the best. They are so great, and we'll get other wives from around the industry too to come on the show, which I'm really excited about. And
it's
who knows,
untapped, John. As far as like you've seen it, you know, the housewives of, again, like Jersey and Miami and all these, they even have Utah, for God's sakes. I mean, it's crazy, Salt Lake City, right? So it's from everywhere, and you've untapped something that, and credit goes to you or whoever thought of this here, is that now it's untapped. You're gonna get a ton of female audience. That's one thing, because ad-free shows, you definitely, when you go to StarCast or you go see those,
a lot of guys,
dude, right? So this one, I mean, it's really smart for you to capitalize and try to get a female market and try to think, hey, what's the next podcast? Because we are inundated with tons of podcasts, which is a good thing. Everyone gets an opportunity, but what's the next?
And you got to be different. You got to be different. That's the biggest thing. You got to be different. So the precipice for the podcast was off the table for 3 that Kim, Giovanna, and Rebby Hardy did. So now my two worlds are kind of coming together with this podcast between the Hardys and this. And actually, I'll give you guys a little spoiler on this coming week's episode of The Extreme Life of Matt Hardy. Rebby Hardy does a little run-in, and we get full, authentic Rebby Hardy in that moment. I had no idea it was coming, and that is awesome. It is both incredibly entertaining and terrifying for me. So I hope you guys enjoy that one.
It can be very intimidating from what people have told me.
Rebby is a super mom. She is a super mom. What that woman does is incredible. She has 4 young kids, homeschooling them, just raising them when Matt is gone. She is one of the most badass women you will ever meet in your life. And I have so much respect for Rebby, and I can't wait to have her on the Wives of Wrestling at some point.
Oh, that would be awesome. But real quick, John, you said it yourself too, that when you came up with the concepts of, the extreme life of Matt Hardy and the Wives of Wrestling podcast, you said it yourself, you have to be different. There's so many things out there. I think Jeff and I pride ourselves in trying to be different. We don't really want to. We're not here to, and not to bash other podcasts, but it really seems there's a negative tone. Everybody wants to critique and say they're wrong and they're doing this wrong, and just kind of a negative aspect of it. Jeff and I always want to be objective and hear other points of views. But when you're coming up with these ideas, and great ideas, by the way, in terms of the creativity and having a platform to pitch those ideas. But for you, when you say different, is it more like you looking at it and say, hey, I want to do this podcast, but what other people are doing this? Are there other people doing this? This person's kind of doing the same form I want to do. How can I tweak it? Or is it really more of just you creatively just finding your own identity, and then that's the identity of the show, not necessarily, for example, because people said the format with Conrad might have been similar to your show, but you said you kind of wanted to tweak it a little bit. Where does that different or identity come from for you?
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes with my TV experience and producing for television, and over the years, just trying different things and throwing things at the wall, seeing what would stick. And a lot of times things wouldn't stick, and you learn from it, right? So that's kind of my ideology with wrestling podcasting. There are so many wrestling podcasts out there right now. So how can you be different? Well, with the Matt Hardy show, sure, it's like a long form bio podcast in a way, like what Conrad's are, but it ventures into the territory of the current, the present, number one. And number two, it gets into creative and psychology in a way that no wrestling podcast has ever gone into. Nobody is willing to break down a match like how Matt does and say, yeah, this is why we did a rest hold here into this spot. So that's totally different than what anyone's ever done. And the insight you get from creative is big. And with this wives thing, it's just an untapped market that hopefully, again, transcends wrestling. And I want the idea to be that my mom, who knows nothing about wrestling, will listen to it because she finds these women endearing and fascinating. So, and my biggest piece of advice to anybody who's trying to cultivate something or come up with an idea for whatever they may be doing is look at the market, assess it, and say, what can we do that is different? And is there an audience for this? Is there a desire for this? It's my belief that there is an audience for this. So when they came to me like, hey, these two women want to do a podcast, I said, okay, how can we format this in a way that people will find it fun? So we're going to cross into wrestling, and there's elements of it for wrestling fans, but also the casual person who just finds it really interesting about raising a family of 5 with your husband out on the road and hearing the stories that come with that.
There you go. That's well said, John, because you've already got the wrestling fan with the other 9 podcasts you guys haven't had for
Right.
shows and everything. So let's get someone else that's new to it, that's going to be a wrestling fan, not from the wrestling, but from, hey, I've heard the stories from families, from
And
kids.
guess what? If it's not for you, it's not for you. That's cool.
Yeah, and you have a variety, guys. You guys are Baskin Robbins over there.
Hey, don't steal my shtick, Jeff.
I had to, man. I had to. And then I guess the final one for me, John, is that obviously, you've talked about run-ins, and you've talked about how Jeff on the first episode made an appearance there. Gold, Jerry, gold, right?
Gold, Jerry.
And obviously, Matt Hardy addressed this on his Twitch about Jeff Hardy and the whole Hall of Fame and WWE, and and what happened with the drug test, whatever like that. I know, obviously, this is something you're going to address. Obviously, why wouldn't you address this on a future episode? But just as a outsider and just looking at this whole thing between WWE and Jeff Hardy, and then you heard about Jeff turning down the Hall of Fame and how WWE may have made a mistake letting him go because they don't want him to go to AEW. Just as a fan, how do you think everything was handled?
Well, I'll tell you this. We talk about this on this coming week's episode of the Hardy show, so be on the lookout for that. It's hard for me to provide a completely impartial perspective because I've been privy to some information that will become public at some point. And I think that I've expressed this, that Jeff has an open platform whenever he wants to use our podcast as a way for him to say things. I imagine that you will hear Jeff talk about what happened at some point in the future. I think that WWE did what in the moment felt like was best for the company. And I get that. Jeff has a history that all of us are aware of. And WWE was probably just looking out for itself in that moment. Once more elements came to light, maybe that should they have waited a little more? That's viewer discretion. That's up to you to decide. But I think ultimately the end result of this, whatever it ends up being, will be something that will make Jeff Hardy really happy for whatever the reason may be, whether it's where he gets to work or how he gets to spend his free time or how much time he spends on the road. I think a guy like Jeff Hardy is at the point in his career where, he should be doing what is best for him. And it's amazing because I was at Survivor Series, and the response that Jeff got live in that arena when he had his entrance, I texted Matt. I was like, bro, this is insane. He had like a rock response. Jeff Hardy is perpetually over. And that's one thing I've learned with this podcast. Matt Hardy was a big star. Jeff Hardy was a mega star. And it's pretty crazy to think about that. So, and Matt will be the first person to tell you that too. So I think that maybe WWE did jump the gun a little bit, but when that whole story comes out, I think that will be up for the fans to decide and everyone to draw their own conclusions. I will say I've seen a lot of reckless speculation about what happened. And from the individuals I've spoken to, I think people are going to feel really silly making a lot of speculations out there about what happened.
And John, I got to say one thing as a journalist and being podcasters, I respect that answer because a lot of people would be like, "Mum's the word. Oh, tune in Friday." But you gave us the best answer. No, but that's the best answer you possibly could give us, and I really appreciate that because some people would just be tight-lipped about it, and you were able to talk about it and not really get, you know what I mean? You gave us a great answer to that, and it's truly appreciated from me, man. Really,
and I appreciate that. And like, here's the thing: like, listen, I've been on both sides of the equation, right? Like, for the last 7 years of my career, was a journalist and reporting things, and now, and it's why I recused myself from reporting on wrestling. Now I'm privy to stuff that it wouldn't be fair for me to report on or talk about because naturally, based on me doing shows with Matt Hardy and Giovanna Angle and Kim Orton, like it would put them in compromising positions if I reported on stuff. So I think it's the best thing a journalist can do is to recuse themselves with a conflict of interest, right? So that's really what I can add on that front. And yeah, I mean, selfishly, I will say tune in because I think these things will be, I think these things will be discussed at some point on our show. I don't know when, but I think they will be. And you'll hear it from the primary source themselves. But also, I recognize there's two sides to every story as well. So, you know,
Spoken like a true showman, Jon.
Like we, hey, listen, bro, I still got my indie character that I do, you know, at the end of the day, you know. So
it gotta come out every once in a while. I completely get it though. But you're right. It's all speculation. Until you hear it from the actual individual, that's all it is speculation.
I think one thing too is, Jon, you mentioned that you also are a personality, you know, in indie shows, right? It's you get that kind of, you know, you do the podcasting, you hang out with talent enough, and then you're like, you know, I want to do this because we did commentary for independent shows here in Jersey, right? So we got the itch because we were like, all right, we're talking about it, we're going to these shows, it's pretty good. We want to dabble in commentary. You know, you've dabbled in being a personality, you've gone in the ring and stuff like that. I don't know if you'd ever take a bump, but you've taken, you know, but
I've wrestled. So
you get the itch, right? You get the itch. It just is as being a fan, you want to do more. You think you're just satisfied with the podcasting, with the hosting, but you want to do
well. I think working in indie wrestling and like being there front row for how matches are put together and having creative input into that. And, you know, I selfishly think I've worked for some really great promotions, and that experience allowed me to change how I view wrestling. And I think it's why Matt and I have so much synergy. If I can selfishly say, I think Matt and I have excellent chemistry, and it's because he and I both share a very similar mentality to wrestling. And so having that indie experience was beyond beneficial for me.
No, you're definitely right on that. And you hit the nail right on the head there in terms of, you know, Jeff had mentioned too, it's the passion and desire, which is why Jeff and I are doing this and have been doing it for a while and still continually do it, because it's a great sense that, I mean, this is stuff we talk about all the time. Wow. It's just, we're just providing it on this platform and talking to other people that I wouldn't say are like-minded. We've had certain individuals that think differently than we do, but it's always an open forum. It's not me trying to debate saying, you know, I was a WWE guy and you're a WCW guy during the Monday Night Wars. We're right, you're wrong. Or this comparison now with, you know, supposed war going on between AEW and WWE. But what I'm more curious, real quick, as we wrap this up, Jon, and you're being so gracious with your time, is that I could definitely tell from talking to you for the first few minutes, you're a fan. You're a true wrestling fan. You love this. You're passionate about this. I want to know from you, what was the earliest moment you can remember watching wrestling? And is it at this point right now, with everything that you're doing, as busy as you are, burning the midnight oil, bringing out those winter coats in this terrible cold weather we're dealing with right now, is it surreal sometimes when you look at it? Hey, I'm talking to Matt Hardy. These people that I've admired and looked at throughout the time, I am now in the same world as they are. Is it surreal sometimes?
Yeah, October 5th, 1997, Bad Blood was the first like real exposure I had to pro wrestling, and some big bad bastard named Kane ripped a door off the cell, and it was wild. You guys should check it out.
The way Vince said it too. That's gotta be Kane.
Oh, we've seen it. That's telling us cell match. Yeah. It's right up there. It's at the bar. Yeah.
So that was like my first like, wow, this is what pro wrestling is, huh? And I mean, I was 4 years old at the time or something like that. I'm dating myself here a little bit, but you know, for me, pro wrestling was something that gave me an escape to have that performative side of me come out a little bit and indulge in that. I play music too, and I played in bands all around the Jersey Shore music scene for years. And when I lost that, performing in pro wrestling was kind of the way to supplement that. So that was a big thing for me. And as I've kind of taken that next step, when I was debating like what is going to be my next career step, I said to myself, I want to be working in either pro wrestling full-time or baseball full-time. Those are my two loves, baseball and pro wrestling. So when the opportunity presented itself to have that potential track, as long as the financial security was there, then it was something I felt comfortable doing because I did feel confident in what I brought to the table is in terms of a fresh perspective. And the greatest compliment I have ever received in this industry was when Matt and I were getting ready to launch the show and we were just brainstorming it. He said to me, and Matt Hardy, I can't state this enough, like Matt Hardy was genuine. This is not me BSing. He was genuinely one of my guys growing up, not Jeff, Matt. So the greatest compliment I got, Matt said to me, man, the way you look at wrestling is such a fresh and intelligent perspective, and it's going to make this so great. That was like the most validating thing I could ever have. So then you combine that and getting to do shows with Kurt Angle, who was one of my other guys, and now his wife, like it's wild, man. But I'm having a great time doing it, and I haven't even really talked about this yet, but I'm going to be getting involved with the world famous Monster Factory in South Jersey, doing some coaching there and working with talent there. And the fact that like talent now come up to me and they're like, John, what can I do better with this promo? How can I develop character better? Whoa, right? Like
me,
I could never coach baseball as much as I love baseball, but like now I can add and contribute to the industry in a positive way here. That's the coolest thing ever. So I'm very fortunate, and there's a lot of BS that happens in wrestling, and not everything is, fantastic, and you're not going to have great relationships with everybody. There are people in the industry who don't like me, and I know that. That's okay. But I ask anyone before making a judgment, just, hey, get a chance to know me a little bit and have a conversation. And I feel that you'll always, at the end of the day, know that I'm trying to do right by you. So I take a lot of pride in the relationships that I cultivate. And I feel like I've never really done wrong by anybody in this industry so far on a genuine level. So yeah, it's been a blast, and I'm looking forward to currently expanding. I think we got 2 main shows, and then I have 3 shows on ad-free shows right now. So 5, 6 shows, whatever I got, and we're gonna keep adding more. So have at it,
Yeah, I mean, before you get even busier, I'm glad we had a few minutes here to chat, John. I'm getting tired. I need a nap after that.
I know, right? And I want to get working with the Jersey Indies too, so I'm gonna hit you guys.
It's fun, man. It's fun.
So.
We'll catch a show one day.
It's a great scene.
It's a really good scene up here in North Jersey. It's really good.
There's a lot of talent I really like in the Jersey scene a lot. So I was going to at one point have a run managing LSG. Yeah, you guys familiar with
LSG? Yeah. Very good.
I was going to manage him in a promotion, and the promotion folded suddenly, so that stunk. But there's a lot of talent in Jersey I can't wait to work with.
Yeah.
Oh, we can't wait to see that too,
man.
Man.
Show with you, John. Then
what a story too, Jeff. Right? That's the ultimate compliment you can get from whether you're interviewing somebody, whether you're and I don't like to call it an interview. To me, it's conversation. That's what we're doing here right now. That's the greatest compliment you get from somebody. Somebody you admire and appreciate, and they come with you with that. That's really great, inspiring, and for me.
You guys are. I mean, and I'm not saying this just to fluff you up here, but I mean, you guys are very good. You guys are very good interviewers, and it's evident that. It's funny when I do a lot of interviews. I'm always curious about the psyche of a lot of interviewers, and like you can tell when someone is extremely pre-planned what they're gonna do, and I'll drop a really interesting nugget, and they just move right on from it. So I really appreciate you guys putting the research in and just having a conversation. It makes it a lot easier. So I do genuinely appreciate that.
John, the check's in the mail for that one. Really appreciate it. You got that, right, Brian?
It's in change, though, unfortunately. It's coming in a bag with a dollar sign on it.
On that note, he is Jon Alba. He is co-host of The Extreme Life with Matt Hardy Fridays on every podcast platform, and also on the Podcast Heat Network and on YouTube as well. Look out for that, because we all want that visual, right? We want to see Matt and Jon Alba interact, so you want to get that visual on YouTube. And February 7th, you got Wives of Wrestling coming up on all podcast platforms.
Can't wait. I cannot wait
for that one. That is going to be crazy. You in between trying
My phone's going to be dead to listen to all these podcasts and watching them too.
No, yeah.
I don't have enough battery life to watch all these.
I've had that new podcast now, John. I mean, great stuff, man. Big fan of ad-free shows. Big fan of Conrad. Glad to have you aboard over there. And again, dude, honestly, once you're settled in in Jersey, whatever like that, definitely catch a show or get a
Hell
beer
yeah.
or whatever like that. And
And on behalf of us here from the High Spot Podcast, Jersey Reg Crew, to you, we just want to say that we greatly appreciate everything you do. It's from the sincerest form to see individuals like you, John, and the success you've achieved. And I don't say anybody ever, it's inspiring, it's motivating. But the thing is, I don't say anybody ever deserves anything. They earned it. And you have earned everything you've gotten, my friend. And we're really happy for you and continued success as the years go by.
That really means a lot to me. And I do appreciate that. And the one thing that's very important for me is to always pay it forward to people. And that's why I love doing interviews, because, you know, I knew what I wanted to do when I was 5 years old. I watched the 98 Yankees home opener, and it was them against the Athletics. It was a 17-13 final score. And I looked at my mom and I said, I want to be the guy that talks about that one day. And I started doing online podcasting before podcasting was a thing in 8th grade. And so, like, shooting my shot, trying to get interviews, like, that was my life for so long. So I'm so appreciative when people like you guys want to chat with me, because, like, it's the most fulfilling thing that I can do is continue to talk to people about that stuff. So seriously, thank you for having me on, guys. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, man. I miss that old Yankee Stadium too. It's just,
dude, it is like,
this new one isn't the same.
man,
the smells,
the new one is an airport. The old Yankee Stadium is, man, my heart breaks when I think about it, because, like, I worked in New England and I'd be at Fenway Park all the time, and, like, you get that feeling of a special ballpark when you walk in there. I went to Wrigley Field for the first time this past year, and, like, you get that feeling of a special ballpark. I miss that so much, because, man,
so funny you said Wrigley Field. We got lost trying to find it, because you would never think in the town that's located in Chicago you would ever find it. And you're like, there's a baseball field here. Jeff and I went to Chicago for
smack dab there in the middle. It's crazy. There.
Awesome.
John, thank you so much, man. Appreciate it. Definitely talk to you down the road. We'll talk some sports as well, but really appreciate the time. Take care, dude. Welcome back to Jersey, dude.
Thank you. Let's do it again sometime, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks.